Well, good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar hosted by the Innovation Policy Lab at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Global Policy at the University of Toronto. I'm Megan Simpson, the Associate Editor of BetaKit, which is Canada's national publication focused on tech startups and innovation. And before we do begin, we have a great conversation ahead of us today. I'm very much looking forward to these two speakers. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat and the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful for the opportunity to work on this land. All right. Today we have, I think, what will be a very interesting discussion ahead of us. We will kind of be talking about how innovation contributes to regional, national prosperity, and this whole kind of idea how, Canada may have missed this shift from a tangible to intangible economy. And moving forward, how can we make sure Canada builds a competitive advantage through policy that leverages kind of the innovation that we're building today and in the future. There's lots to discuss and we only have an hour to do it. So let's kind of get right in. To give you guys a heads up, we will be inviting questions from the audience in the second kind of half of the hour. You can submit those through the Zoom Q&A. So we'll take those and kind of answer your questions as best we can. But to start, let me introduce our speakers for today. First off, we have Jim Balsteely. He's the chair of the Canadian Council of Innovators and retired chairman and co-CEO of BlackBerry, formerly known as RIM. And we also have Dan Bresnitz, professor at U of T's Munk School of Global Affairs. And among Dan's long list of accomplishments, he's the chair of the Innovation Studies at Munk School. He's the co-director of its Innovation Policy Lab, hosting us here today, and co-director of CFAR's Innovation, Equity, and the Future of Prosperity Group. So really looking forward to hearing from these two gentlemen today. And to kick it off, I'm going to hand it over to Jim.
Thank you, Megan, and good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to join you today. And first, let me start by thanking Professor Sherry Bresnitz for inviting me to present to you on the very important topic of the digital transformation. My focus today is to enrich your perspective of our changing world, advance your understanding of the impact of these changes on Canada, and then share some ideas on how we can navigate them going forward. The digital transformation over the past 3 decades has resulted in a new global rule of law framework forged to govern the way that innovation is incentivized and how gains from innovation are captured and distributed. The development of this framework was motivated first by the rise of the knowledge-based economy, in which the strategic focus of business shifted to generating and controlling traditional intellectual property assets, such as copyrights and patents. The framework has been further elaborated to reflect the emergence of the data-driven economy, in which the strategic focus of business shifted increasingly to generating and controlling data assets, as well as the valuable intellectual property developed on top of these assets through the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning. This transformation has created a new kind of economy in which the basis of wealth and power is derived from the control of these two intangible assets. It has also created a new kind of social and political space in which both our public and private spheres are technologically reshaped. IP and data are now the world's most valuable business and national security assets. In 1976, 16% of the S&P 500 was intangible. Today, intangibles comprise over 90% of the S&P 500's 27 trillion in total value. To give you a sense of scale, the world's 5 most valuable companies alone are worth well over 6.6 trillion. The vast majority of their market value is comprised of IP and data, not bricks and mortar or even machines. According to the US Chamber of Commerce, IP and data intensive industries contribute nearly $7 trillion annually to the US economy. The tangible and intangible economies are fundamentally different in many ways. In the production-based industrial economy of tangibles, the ability to produce efficiently at scale and sell at lower prices enables the capture of markets, which underpins profitability. Traditional economy trade agreements open foreign markets to gain greater access to production economies of scale. Competition naturally emerges from the removal of restrictions on commerce, and efficiency is based on optimization of global supply chains. With the shift to the knowledge-based economy, companies and countries turn their focus to strategically generating valuable IP assets, and more recently to strategically controlling valuable data assets. Wealth accrues to the owners who amass these two rent-generating assets that can be commercialized based on a principle of legal restriction. Digital products based on IP and data have effectively zero marginal production costs, which results in a winner-take-all, or at least most, economics. Market opening thus drives concentration, not competition. The instruments designed to govern this type of global economy focus on the protection of IP and data assets. Canada ignored the rise of the knowledge-based economy and as a result became a large IP importer. And despite repeated calls from our domestic tech industry, we still have no national IP or data strategy. Data also shows that Canada missed the shift from the tangible to the intangible economy by not placing value on generating and owning valuable IP stock assets. As you can see from the dark blue bar, Canada's innovation outputs shrank since 2000, while global innovation outputs soared. Canada dropped to 22nd place in the 2020 Bloomberg Innovation Index, behind Slovenia, because you cannot commercialize what you don't own. Canada's weak performance in innovation costs our economy several $100 billion per year and leaves us more vulnerable in a turbulent world. These economic shifts have a direct impact on the everyday lives of Canadians. We get a glimpse by looking at Canada's GDP per capita index, particularly over the last decade. According to the IMF, Canada's GDP per capita is 3% lower than in 2010 levels, while the US has experienced a 35% increase in the same period, due in part to the alignment of their economic policy strategies with contemporary economic realities. The US National Bureau for Economic Research report states, and I quote, "Patents are the most concrete and comparable measure of innovative output over companies and countries in time. They have a direct impact on wealth and power at the firm level and nationally, which is why smart innovation countries focused on owning and protecting these assets. Over the recent 3 years of reporting from 2014 to 2017, global PCT filings of patents have grown by 14%, while filings from Canada actually shrank by 22%, by far the worst performance amongst 152 member states. There is also a noticeable gap between the performance narratives coming from Canadian universities and the metrics that support these perceived successes. President Obama's quote on the slide speaks for itself, but contrast it with the University of Waterloo President's declaration that their policy of giving away taxpayer-funded IP is somehow working. The numbers tell a different story. From 2012 to 2015, the University of Utah generated $212 million in licensing income, or $136,000 per million in research expenditures. By contrast, in 2016, the University of Waterloo generated $39,000 in licensing income, or $206 per million of research expenditure. University of Toronto's performance is not materially better. The graphic on the left is an example of promotional material distributed in the United States by the Waterloo Economic Development Corporation. Here is Canada's current innovation pitch to foreign investors. Our taxpayers will pay all of the professors' research costs and salaries. We'll also give you Canada's best taxpayer-funded intellectual property for free, whereas in the US you would have to pay for that. In addition, our taxpayer-funded STEM talent is cheaper, and if you hire them, we'll give you tax credits. You pay no taxes in Canada, nor does Canada's economy expect to participate in your wealth effects. And in many cases, we'll top it all off with large grants. As part of this fundamental shift, we've come to depend on the vast network of internet and telecommunications infrastructure developed to allow for the open and rapid exchange of information and services. Big data assembled from ubiquitous sensors, coupled with ever more powerful AI and machine learning engines, and deployed through next generation 5G networks, are transforming passive infrastructure into a veritable digital nervous system. This Mandela schematic is a representation of how I think strategically about the cross-cutting issues that the digital transformation raises. It's about values, the distribution of wealth, preserving competitive markets, preserving privacy, health, maintaining integrity of democratic process, and very importantly, ensuring national security. Since AI sees the human being only in datafied form, the regulation of AI must be premised on private individuals having rights and recourse to remedies concerning the use of and control over their data profile, commensurate with the human rights that private individuals have to control how they present to society in a physical world. Also, given its social nature and public good characteristics of non-rivalry, data gives rise to spillovers or externalities, both good and bad. Any regulation of AI should thus explicitly address the consequences of these characteristics for human rights. That is why I argue that data governance is the most important public policy issue of our time. Whoever controls the data controls who and what interacts with it. Furthermore, any data collected can be reprocessed and analyzed in new ways in the future that are unanticipated at the time of collection. And this has major implications for the global economy, security, and democracy. It is essential to look at data governance as an integrated whole because the exploitation of data generates a new feedback that modifies the behavior of the society and economy that generated the data in the first place. This is why social media applications should be subject to regulation protective of the public interest, just as broadcasting is today. I would argue that data governance is a more urgent policy challenge than climate change, and here's why. Abuse of data compromises the very democratic processes on which we rely to intelligently and effectively address challenges like climate change. For instance, a recent study by Nieman Lab showed that YouTube's algorithms push climate misinformation videos, which their creators then profit from. We know that Facebook's algorithms played a central role in inciting the genocide in Myanmar. Quantitative social psychology that leveraged social media information was used to influence outcomes from scenarios such as Kenya's national election to Brexit and Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. And of course, the sea of deliberate misinformation spread during the COVID-19 pandemic. None of these issues can be dealt with without accounting for data governance. The solutions are in the strategies I will address in a couple minutes. There is a global race underway by large firms and nation states to own critical IP, especially for key emerging areas such as blockchain, AI, and machine learning. In 2017, China, for the first time, received more patent applications than the US, EU, Japan, and South Korea combined. In 2018, China filed more than 30,000 AI patents, an impressive tenfold jump in 5 years, and about 2.5 times more than the United States, which it surpassed for the lead. According to a recent WIPO report, Canada was the only jurisdiction to see a decrease in the number of AI patents applied for between 2016 and 2018. In 2019, China took over top spot in the world for international patent applications. According to recent statistics, 1.5 million patent applications were filed in China, more than the combined total of the 10 next busiest IP offices. In advanced policy circles, the competition to dominate AI has been characterized as AI nationalism or techno-nationalism. Machine learning is a general purpose technology that will affect all sectors and parts of society. It leads to the winners gaining enormously enhanced economic, technological, and military powers. You cannot patent data, but you can patent around it and block access, even when the data is shared. This slide is an example of measures foreign governments such as the US, UK, France, and Germany have taken to protect domestic interests from foreign actors who understand how to profit in an innovation economy. These are examples of governments using legislative and policy levers that ensure foreign investments yield positive foreign investment spillovers or prevent negative ones, and are demonstrative of coordinated national IP and data strategies. Today's trade agreements are called economic partnerships because they create expanded legal structures that enhance the value of those who own intangible assets. These economic frameworks originated just after the turn of the century, when advanced economies turned to the creation of mega regulatory agreements to manage the digital transformation at global scale for their interests. The original TPP was the first. Today's trade agreements embody instruments for regulatory control by dominant parties, so much so that the words free trade do not even appear in the recently ratified USMCA. What the USMCA does contain at every turn is stronger and longer IP protections and unfettered flow of data, which extend and entrench US IP and data monopolies. The dominant parties make the rules, increasing the asymmetries with nations lacking coherent IP and data strategies and policy orientations. I want to be clear on one important distinction here. While I advocate for Canadian businesses to grow their IP stocks to be able to compete in the contemporary global economy, I strongly disagree with the high level of IP protections the US government pushes on the world above and beyond WTO globally accepted standards. Research shows that ever-increasing IP protections undermine business dynamism, restrict access to knowledge, and drive inequalities, yet they are unfortunately being enshrined in treaties at ever-increasing levels. Danny has a lot to say about the over-the-top IP productions, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. Sadly for Canada, the recent Barton Council report is completely silent on the imperative for Canada to strategically generate IP and data stocks, and neglects entirely that coordinated strategies are required to begin that shift. They recommend US-style strong IP protections, which means more economic rents paid out to IP owners who are principally foreign, and translates into dollars flowing out of Canada. It also suggests a counterproductive recommendation for a new FDI agency charged with developing a new FDI strategy that, I quote, should emphasize new investment that boosts innovation, including brownfield investments involving the acquisition of Canadian firms by foreigners, end of quote. Further, they advocate a dangerously anachronistic approach to free trade agreements, not realizing that today's trade agreements are much different from those 30 years ago. This is what happens when governments seek advice from people who do not understand the contemporary economy. Our country was built by strategic and bold thinkers who developed initiatives for national infrastructure, community or industrial cooperatives, and sound social policies. The digital transformation has ushered in the need for updated strategies, institutions, programs, and policies. On this slide is my list of areas where a coherent and integrated digital policy infrastructure is urgently in need of implementation. This will determine the resilience of a secure and prosperous Canada that can withstand hard times while laying foundations for a better future. There's a lot here to unpack. I thank you for your time and look forward to our discussion after Dan's remarks.
Thank you so much, Jim. Dan, I think Jim has given us a lot to think about, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to add.
Sure. So first, again, thank you for Jim, thank you for Megan, thank you for everybody that made it possible, and thank you for above 200 people that I think are with us. I also think that Jim is for a unique experience. The reason is that I think he's too hopeful, by far. So let me explain why I say that. So for the last 15 years, at least, Canada business sector has been less innovative with every passing year. Whatever indicator you want to use, and Jim showed that some, show the same trend. those are the exact same years in which the rest of the world took off. Worse, this dereliction of duties by both government and the business sector is now apparent in the things that count. Jim showed GDP per capita, productivity, basically anything that would allow companies to pay higher wages. And if those trends will not quickly change, the next generation of Canadian, and by the way, my dear students, those of you who watch us, I mean you, will already have enjoying declining prosperity compared to my generation and all the generation of the past. Add to that is the impact of COVID on the energy sector. And I think that my Irish friends will use a technical term, "fucked," on our economic future. There is an utter and complete failure by government to deal with this issue. Canada never had an innovation policy, and nothing suggests that any leader of any of the three parties actually even thinks about changing that. As some of you know, I've done a lot of research on and for Ireland. And if I want to be really nice to our political leaders, the economic growth policy we seem to have is basically, let's do Ireland, but let's do it very badly, about having a foreign direct investment based innovation policy, I mean growth policy, forget innovation. We don't know what it is. The slide that you show from Jim about Waterloo, I think express it all. So yes, even an FDI attraction-based policy, we are outclassed and outshined. Forget Ireland. South Carolina does a much better job of FDI-based growth than Canada. Please notice that I have not yet even started to talk about intangible and IP. So now, hopefully, after I got you depressed enough, let's talk about them. As Jim's slides bluntly show, we are not in the game, and we never have been in the game. This means that if we're going to enter it now, it will be from a position of deep disadvantage. We are basically going to play high-stake poker for our economic future, where all the good cards have either already been dealt or, as Jim will say, bought by our opponents. And to make matters worse, we seem to be in a complete denial that this is the situation. So what can be done? I would say that we need to devise a real innovation policy. And it's important to remember that we're talking about innovation, not invention. We're talking about the acts of bringing new products, new or improved products and services to the market, not about coming up with great ideas. And therefore, there's only two agents in the economy that can do that and do that. Companies, corporations, firms, whatever you want to call them, and individuals. Sometimes we call them entrepreneurs. So that innovation policy, if we're ever going to have one, should focus on the behavior of those two agents. It's really nice to have a VC policy. It's great to have more accelerators. But if we are not going to change the behavior of our business sector, nothing else will matter, period. As part of this policy, we need to build a strategic, intangible strategy that assumes that we are in a position of weakness and that there is nothing we can do to change that position. If we play the quantity game, meaning we just try to amass more IP, China will eat us, and the US will eat us, and the EU will eat us. Even Korea will eat us. Therefore, our aim should be fourfolded. Focus on ensuring the freedom of operation I mean the ability of companies and entrepreneurs to innovate, both current and future, because we're talking about innovation. We actually do not know what our innovators will do. We need to ensure that they can do it. Second, asymmetric IP warfare, where we go for quality and control of choke points, not just quantity. And we should aim to ensure voice for Canadian firms and widespread diffusion of Canadian technologies as the core technology of new areas, speaking, for example, about artificial intelligence. And one example of how to do that is ensuring that many of them end up as standard essential patents in global technology standards. And together with that, work to build coalitions in the international bodies that govern IP to change the rules of the game, because the rules of the game are against us and actually are against many other countries, in ways that actually align the IP game more with what is our real industrial and economic structure, not what is Silicon Valley's economic structure, because we have this dream that we can become Silicon Valley North. No, we can't. We are Canada. Let's try to figure out what is an IP, global IP regime, which is good for Canada, not for Silicon Valley. And last but not least, I have to repeat, and I completely agree with Jim, avoid signing international trade treaties that lock us into IP and intangible regime that clearly works against our interest. And by the way, I would say the interest of most humanities. But as a Canadian, and this is a panel about Canada, it definitely works against Canada. So with those happy, hopeful, and cheerful remarks, I will stop now and open the floor for discussions.
All right, Dan. Well, hopefully we haven't depressed the audience too much that they don't want to submit questions. But yes, everyone can now submit their questions. We'll be fielding those. I think to start it off, I'd like to pose a question to both of you first. Noting first off that both of you are very much experts in your field and have given some really strong background information here. I think that is really valuable for your arguments. But I think one question that I really have as a journalist who's trying to disseminate information in the now and help people understand what you guys are talking about. How much does COVID really affect this? And is it plausible for Canada to really focus on these things that you're talking about when we're in a second wave of the pandemic and we've started to see our federal government investing more in just keeping businesses still being able to function and keep employees on a day-to-day basis? So my question to both of you, and maybe Dan, you can answer this one first, just because you're already up, but how does COVID affect this? Are we still able to push these ideas forward in a global pandemic?
Do you want, so since I was so depressing and pessimistic up until now, let me
switch to Jim if you want. We want a little switch. Jim, I'm sure you have thoughts on this. I know you have thoughts on this.
Well, my point is pretty simple, that COVID has laid bare these trends that Danny and I talked about, and it's accelerated them. And a couple of weeks ago, 135 CEOs in Canada wrote a letter to the Prime Minister calling for an innovation strategy and calling for a nation building strategy underpinned by IP and data strategies. And they're imploring action. So not only can we do it during the pandemic, it's existential that we must do it.
I will add, and this will come as a surprise because it's optimistic, that COVID actually allows you to do a lot of things you couldn't have done before. Internationally, you will not be punished if you try to do things under COVID, which otherwise you would be. There's a lot more appetite for change and the acceptance of trying to do new things by all Canadians. And exactly the same trends that Jim have shown. The US really dislike the fact that China is now much better in the game than the American owned and created. So there's a very good chance that you can experiment around it and change things. And all of us are at home with a computer, and what better time than to innovate then?
All right, well, keeping on the topic of kind of current trends, one of the questions that we got in, and bear with me as I read through these, apologies if I stumble, everyone. What is the impact of Biden's election on Canada's innovation strategy, given his economic recovery plan, which aims to strategically invest in US R&D and innovation capabilities? Who wants to answer that one first? And Jim, any thoughts?
Well, I mean, first of all, obviously, I was never a fan of the values and style of President Trump, and I would much rather have had dinner with President Obama. But let's be clear, President Obama, I look at it, we did the Gordie Howe Bridge, we had to pay for it, and then another $250 million for the customs carousel. We got tariffs on softwood lumber. We never got the pipeline approved. They jackhammered TPP on us. And then they come and say the world needs more Canada, buy a lot more of our military gear and sign TPP. And then they allowed customs quick processing, I think one from Montreal and one from Vancouver, for tourists to go to the US. So they kind of beat us, 10-0, but with such charm and smiles. So, I think US knows how to look after US, whether it's Democrat or Republican. And the ideas economy is much more mercantilist because it's not a cooperative comparative advantage game. So you have to look after yourself and no one's going to look after it for you. So I don't think it's that consequential between the two administrations, because all these trends and all these hits happened under the Obama administration, and they carried under the Trump. But that's just leaders looking after their citizens in a global economic world with different, personalities and values and styles, but they still know which side their bread is buttered on, economically and security-wise.
Actually, I kind of have a follow-up question to that, unless Dan, you have some remarks that you want to add there.
Let's hear your follow-up question, and then I'll try to do
both. Okay, sounds good. So listening to a lot of what you guys talked about, and Dan giving kind of that negative perspective, I mean, when you look at the Canadian federal government, for example, you have seen in Trudeau's government, budgets of past focus on innovation, maybe not so much of late. So when you guys are saying, there's not enough, we need to see more, Canada's being less innovative every year, what more does, at least on the federal level, does the government need to do to, and again, we could probably go into a whole another half hour of just talking about this, but give me a couple points, both of you, like what tangibly can the government do to, not doing?
So first, let's just be very clear. The Trudeau government and the Harper government before it did nothing for innovation. The only thing that the Trudeau government actually did was to put the word innovation. Let's look at the super clusters. Let's, first of all, from what we now know, almost no money was given to anyone. And the red tape is so severe that nothing will happen. Second, if you actually look at the sum of the super clusters, when you divide it by 5, as Jim can tell you, this is not even, round one of a not very good VC fund for one company in Silicon Valley. Basically the budget that one software company in Silicon Valley will use in less than a quarter. The Strategic Innovation Fund, or whatever it was called, about 60 to 70% of them was used for the car industry and the energy industry. Highly innovative stuff. No. So let's just put that clear. There has not been an innovation policy. There's a lot to be done. There is a lot, and that I do have to say, and I think one of Canada's greater resources is that we top the world in performance of our students from K-12 to 12 and university. We are the top. How about focusing on a policy that use the minds and brains and capabilities of young Canadians? I'll stop there. If you don't want to call it innovation because you don't like the word, call it Young Canada. I don't care. Just do it.
I'll give my one thing. Justin Trudeau asked me and Chrystia Freeland to come meet with them when they were in opposition. And I gave them, and it was Scott Bryce and Morneau, the whole gang, and it was their economic committee, and they asked me privately to present on it. And I said, you have a redistribution strategy, not a prosperity strategy. That Canada's first world in inputs, third world in outputs. And I gave substantially some of these stats here. And I said, and at the end of it, he asked me, what's the one thing you would advise me to do? And I said, it's very simple. Create an innovation office in the PMO housed by experts that makes integrated decision-making. And to date, there's still not one innovation expert in the Prime Minister's office. And it's highly fragmented, it's highly siloed, it's very technical, and it's what you call dual use, that it's both economy and national security at the same time. And for some reason, there's an aversion to bringing in experts and people rolling up their sleeves and actually addressing this. And you know, it's such an obvious thing to do that other countries do. They have the Iron Triangle in the US, they have integrated systems in Germany. They have, Danny's an expert on the innovation office in Israel. Why wouldn't they hire Danny and have him come in there and say, do something like that? And you have to understand that the ideas economy is much more attuned to small countries. Look at Taiwan in microelectronics. Look at Finland in telecommunications. Look at Israel in cybersecurity. Look at landlocked Switzerland, a quarter Canada's size in pharmaceuticals. It's ideally attuned to small countries, but we have an aversion in our political office in bringing in experts. And so you get people who are generalists that like to say the word and throw money around, and whether it's super clusters, it's just a series of face plants, misfires, and nothing burgers, even though we have all this potential. So, you know, the reason I think speaking a bit sharp is good is because it's like a gifted student who doesn't do their homework and is failing. And we have all this potential, and the squandering, I think, is morally unacceptable to our future and to our country, especially when these technologies are, as I said, dual use.
And to a point that you made earlier, Jim, Canada has kind of introduced this idea of a national IP strategy, but there's yet to be kind of any movement on that, just to kind of emphasize your point there. Going again to the questions and kind of connected to that we have from the audience here. The next one I'm going to read is, the dramatic concentration in intangibles in the US S&P 500 appears to be centered on the big platform companies. Should Canada's strategy focus on attempting to grow world scale platform companies, is the question. I guess scale up versus startup possibly is the question, but I'll reread it for you guys. Should Canada's strategy focus on attempting to grow world scale platform companies?
Well, as I said earlier, the intangibles, the IP economy creates natural monopolies, and the data-driven economy has economies scale, scope, network externalities, and information asymmetries that also creates monopolies. So every sector is monopolistic, whether it's a big platform company or whether it's a small niche for refrigerator doors. And so, you know, but our problem is we didn't aim at the game of generating and controlling intangible stock assets. And so we missed the shift. Just pick some segments. Like, I think we could be doing IP capabilities in forestry, in agriculture, in medical, in energy. We have lots of sectors where we could build value out along it, but we have to aim at the right thing and put in the expertise. But, you know, Dan has studied this globally, and he studied various geographies. He has a lot to say, and I'll reiterate, he should be the first hire into the innovation office at the Prime Minister's, and that's what I said to them 5 years ago.
don't know if he has time. He seems so busy already.
or whether he values his sanity. But yes, I'll put the question actually backward. And let us return to 1999, just before the dot-com crash, and look at ICT. And Canada looks really good in terms of having global companies. We have a small company from Waterloo called RIM. We have Nortel. And Bombardier actually looks to be really innovative and successful. We're in 2020. What are we talking about? Global platform Canada. I mean, Jim, can you think about one company that in the next 5 years have any chance of becoming anything close to what Nortel and RIM were? No. So while I've been telling government up until now how they failed, here is another question, which all Canadians should think about. Are all Canadian CEOs stupid for diminishing their R&D budget in Canada? Or they understand how the Canadian economy works at the moment and has nothing to do with innovation, and they do the right thing? And if this is correct, then we have to understand why most savvy business leaders in Canada think it's wrong to allocate more money to R&D. Before we say that we can go and build global platform companies, let's start with the basics.
And I think a really interesting kind of point to that is when you look at Canada's current tech darling and what became one of the most valuable companies in Canada during the pandemic, Shopify. They historically, when you talk about, and I know you guys like to talk about IP, they historically didn't have a strong focus on intellectual property. They didn't, amount a lot. And then as soon as they become this like global company, they really shifted to focus a little bit more on that. So it's very, very interesting, I think. And I don't know what it means necessarily for Canada, but you guys might have some thoughts on that.
Jim, I think that's one of your favorite subjects. So why don't you explain companies have to have IP?
Whenever there's money, IP companies will come out of the woodwork and all want their $50 to $100 million a year. It's just the way it works. And you have to focus on your freedom to operate strategies on IP concurrent with generating your product. I don't know the details of how many demand letters they've received. It's a bit on hold probably during the pandemic, but the nicest companies in the world that you would think, they all darkened RIM's door wanting their $50 to $200 million a year. And because that's how the game goes. And even large telcos who are large customers did that very game. And it's just part of the nature of the game. It's very nasty, it's very predatory, it strikes you as wrong at every level, but it is inherent to the game. And if one does not prepare for that, it's not personal. They do it to their best friend and their next door neighbor. It's a very impersonal and sharp game. So I've never heard of a company not being pulled into that when they've generated some success. But I don't know the details, and I'm not interested in talking about any one company in particular.
Moving back to our audience questions again. Next one we have is, which industries need to take a lead in innovation efforts in Canada, and why? Dan, I think you're up.
So let me just say one thing. Remember when I said that we are an innovation and not invention? That's another problem that I have with much of Canada's innovation policy for the last few decades. It's basically an industrial policy, but in a different name. Instead of actually looking at innovation and how you innovate, and what companies and how we maximize innovation, we go for the new shiny things, usually too late. And here is the deal. If I or anyone in Canada know what industries are going to create abnormal profits and create the new set of billionaires in the next 5 to 10 years, I'll be absolutely stupid working for the University of Toronto. Either I should join the industry or should invest in the industry or become the highest ever paid employee of Goldman Sachs if I know the future to 10 years. The fact is, and I think what Jim just showed you about artificial intelligence, at the time politicians know about industries is about 7 years too late, because those industries have become hot and they become trendy. That's already 5 years too late by that time for you to do anything as a policy. And then 2 years later, the politicians heard that some of our friends. But where we can put reasonable bets, we do have energy. And I would actually look at Newfoundland. So people constantly talk about Alberta. I'm utterly impressed with Newfoundland and how they dealt with basically the lottery ticket that they got, how they reinvested to maximize R&D, not just in oil, but around it in Newfoundland. And look at what people are employed in Newfoundland, Newfoundlanders, how well the new Newfoundlanders are educated, the kind of new companies that come in Newfoundland. So I don't know if you know, but Canada's biggest, by far, fintech unicorn is a Newfoundland company. So if you want that game to be played, I would say go to Newfoundland. Agriculture is definitely another one, including aquaculture. And we have a very good health system. It's sort of surprising that we are not so successful as we should be. There's at least 3 bets, maybe 4 that I just said now.
I think you like Newfoundland because they like you because you're such a straight shooter. That's why you get along with the Newfoundlanders.
And they're basically part of Ireland, so it's okay.
I would say one thing in that, which is Canada was built on collective activities. That was my last slide. We created grain co-ops, equipment co-ops. We created mutual companies for shared insurance. We created credit unions for shared financing. We built our country through collective community activities. And I think we could take a page out of that playbook. We should learn our old industrial strategies and say, where are the places we can cooperate again? Let's jettison this foolish neoliberalism that everything's a market solution that we took in the last 25 years. You know, I have an expression I use. The US says we talk Jeffersonian, but rule Hamiltonian. In Canada, we talk Hamiltonian, but rule Jeffersonian. And so you have to get involved in these things. And I think we can start to look at some patent collectives, you know, involving our smart minds and our smart researchers. We can start to create some data trusts, whether it's for the energy industry, whether it's for agriculture industry, whether it's for medical, whether it's for cities. So let's start looking at the institutions. Our forefathers built this country through innovative policies and institutions. And we, you know, as Karl Polanyi famously said, laissez-faire was planned. And let's start thinking, let's put our thinking caps back on and start thinking, how can we organize? How do we cooperate? Be it the energy industry in Newfoundland, the agriculture industry in the prairies, the medical industry in Alberta, the cities in Toronto, or some other place like that. And let's stop this pure neoliberalism, which I think has cost us so much of our fading.
Yeah. The next question we have in here from the audience, I think is really interesting and I would love to get answered for them. I think you guys have touched on it a little bit already, but the question is, what do you think is the main reason that Canadian governments and big businesses are unable to put a comprehensive innovation and commercialization action plan for the 21st century?
They're lazy. The thinking's outdated. It's a cabal of policy folks. I teach at the Canada School. the CCI, it's time for a turnover. We need the young, bright civil servants. We need to turn to our innovative CEOs. We need to use the bright young students at the Munk Center and places like that, and the BSIA. We need a policy turnover. We need updated thinking. We need people who approach this in a changed world. And we had policies that said, you don't have to do anything, you don't have to know much. And that's how you grapple with a changed world. No, you have to know a lot, and you have to do a lot, and you got to have a real spine. And so no, people they didn't update their thinking, and they didn't get in there and contend.
Dan, any thoughts on that one?
Yes, if I was a bank CEO now, or one of our biggest 3 telcos, why should I do anything? I have a very nice, highly profitable agreement with my competitors and the government. Why should I rock the boat? Why should I innovate? Innovate is uncertain, it's risky, I might lose my job. Why should I do it? And I think that explains it. So again, innovation will not come from current Canadian big businesses. It will not come from areas in which we already have an oligopoly. And it should come from areas where we don't. And by the way, that's exactly what has happened. So Jim mentioned Israel. If you look at Israel until the 70s, even 80s, you will see a very old-fashioned economy, and every questions that we had about why the government and business don't do anything could be said about Israel. All the transformation happened for 2 reasons. A, there were entrepreneurs from the business sector and the policy, but really from the business sector on the side. And there was a horrific economic crisis that basically destroyed the old economy and the old businesses and created institutional vacuum in which those new people rebuilt what does it mean to be what is, I should say, the Israel economy and Israeli institutions. So I would love to hear from real entrepreneurs and create an institution that put their voice on the table. I have no hopes that the current CEOs of the biggest business will innovate, because I don't expect them. If I will be giving their job, I will not innovate. I don't have to. Why should I?
So from my perspective, as a journalist with BetaKit, where we cover very specifically Canadian startups and innovation and smaller companies from the early stages of they haven't even got their money yet to the likes of Shopify. I guess my question would be, at least from that perspective, what should these entrepreneurs, these CEOs, these startups be focusing on that they aren't already focusing on?
Well, I think the first thing you have to learn is how ideas are generated and controlled and commercialized. It's a very technical realm. And the government, to their credit, I've been dealing with the provincial governments in the large provinces and also in the civil service in Ottawa about teaching people how to generate and own ideas. So I think it's very technical, and I would encourage that most of all. And second of all, I think we need to reestablish a proper structure where the people who are the mentors need to be people that have commercialized ideas, not from other sectors. Everyone wants to be in tech because it's sexy, but if you spent your career outside of commercializing ideas or researching it, then you shouldn't be mentoring in that. And so, try to get the time of somebody who's a real expert in it and really learn the technocracy of it so that you can marry that. Generally, what we have very good technical acuity in creating products, inventing, as Dan said. How do you get your most out of it? How do you get $1 billion for your company if you sell it rather than 10 million? It's by corralling the ownership structures around it, generally rather separate from the actual core invention itself.
Dan, anything to add there?
Yeah, so I would warn them not to take too much VC, especially American VCs, too early. And the reason is, and by the way, not because the VCs are evil. The VCs will probably make the money. But the VC's business model is to have a financial exit as quickly as possible. So the minute you took a high-class VC money, the clock about your financial exit, which in Canada usually, as in 99.999%, on selling yourself to someone, and start ticking. So one of the things that you, if you want to build a big company, needs to figure out is how to play the VC game and how to play the investor games and how to play the debt game in a way that buys you time. It's okay if what you want is $20 million, then go for the VCs. But if you want to build big Canadian companies, the VCs are not your friends.
I feel like we could have a whole nother conversation on venture capital, commercialization of Canadian startups, all that stuff. That's a whole other like hour or two that we could totally have. But we only have a couple more minutes here. So I'm actually just going to ask you guys kind of a related question to when I said, you know, what can startups and CEOs do? A couple questions we've got here from the audience. What's advice you would give to students, to universities to be part of these efforts as well?
Dan, you're in the game.
Sure. So first of all, to my students, I would tell them to start companies. And I will tell them to start companies as quickly as they can and preferably multiple times. And by the way, I wouldn't tell them to that just so they'll create big companies. But I think that the experience of actually building an organization and understanding what does it mean to build an organization that survives on actually selling services and products and employing people, and what it does to your ambition about where you want to be is completely different than if you go to management consulting. So first of all, to all my students, start, if you prefer to start an NGO, go for it, but start companies. Employ people, find out how to sell products and services, preferably not only in Canada. For universities, I actually think that the universities should focus on what universities do, which is education and research. I think that it's very dangerous for universities to think that they can actually become an agent of innovation. So I would focus on that. For people who have great ideas, call Jim. He will tell you how to run a company.
Yeah, and I think later this week, Monk is starting an IP education course that everyone who goes into the incubators and the accelerators and all that on campus or in the innovation office must take. I mean, having been deeply involved around the world in these issues, especially in the US, you would be shocked how much of a technocracy there is in learning how to technically play this game of generating standards, essential patents, integrating them, how you do your contracting practices, how you bring the kind of dozen different categories of IP into a portfolio and all of that. So, you know, I have seen we don't teach it in the country. We didn't aim at it as a policy imperative, therefore we didn't teach it. So, you know, anyone I mentor, and there's a lot of them, and they tend to be doing very well in the top growing companies and so in Canadian companies, is marry the technocracy of accumulating your property, not just generating your ideas. It's a two-step, not a one-step. And we teach the one step, but we not the second. So my strong encouragement would be to do that. And I think you'll find that if you generate the freedom to operate, the funds follow a firm that has generated a good product with freedom to operate to deploy it. Money comes at you and opportunities come at you. That would be my one thing. Learn it technically, find those that'll teach it to you and mentor it to you. And you realize it's like manufacturing money when you do that. You literally manufacture it. It's like building blocks. It's inevitable you'll be successful. Just how big?
So manufacturing money, that's where we'll leave it today. All right, we've gone past now only a couple minutes, so I won't say that's not too bad. I know you gentlemen both have a lot of thoughts. I appreciate both of you taking the time today to share those thoughts with us. And thank you to everyone today who also joined us on this feed. Appreciate everyone's time. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.